All right, so up to now, we've looked already at really a remarkable range of design types. We've looked at memorial design. We had the designer of the World War II memorial, Friedrich St. Florian. We've seen an architect in Blake Middleton, business strategy and marketing with Mark Meyer, drug design with Alexandros Makrianis, which we understood roughly 50% of, which I thought was pretty good. Product design with Chris Hacker from Johnson & Johnson, the whole reimagining of journalism and Dan Kennedy, and then Penny Say and information design. And I just ask you to think a little bit, reflect just a little bit on some of the common threads that we've noticed in these things thus far. And this will permeate our discussion a little bit today, but one of them, it seems to me, we talked about this with Marshall Lawson. I neglected to mention Marshall Lawson as well in graphic design. And you remember we talked about this last time, and we talked about it with Marshall Lawson. The idea of the project room that she talked about, where everything associated with the project, all the research was in one room, pinned up, whatever. It's not, the important thing is, you're not having to remember it all in your head. You leave a little bit of space in your head for intuition. We talked about creating a space for intuition, but that only happens when you have a bunch of facts and a bunch of data and a bunch of research around you. So I thought that was a really good takeaway that would be applicable to almost any field that you all happen to be in. The idea of creating a draft, the multiple iterations, we're going to see a lot of this today, I think. Testing and revising. There's all kinds of ways to test what you do, but the hope is that you use the information you get from testing it to make revisions. And of course, one of the things we've talked about from the very beginning, the idea of challenging the question or the very premise of the thing that you're designing. So with that, let me introduce our guest. We have with us today architect and furniture designer Charlie Lazor. Charlie Lazor co-founded the furniture design office Blue Dot in 1997, which is nationally known and really a great company, with his partners John Christakos and Maurice Blanks. Blue Dot's works have been recognized for its precise and often inventive use of materials, fabrication, technology, and assembly methods to produce furniture that is elegant, playful, and accessible. In 2003, Charlie founded Lazor Office to pursue a broader spectrum of design programs and scales, including architecture and environments. The flat pack prefabricated building system is one of the first such design efforts. At Lazor Office, the mantra is seek holistic solutions to complex problems, and it governs their work. A successful design is not a pretty form. It is a rigorously developed condition that extends the user's potential to achieve their goal. This begins with identifying key needs and problems through a process of observation and analysis, then developing a form that seeks to synthesize the complex whole into an elegant, holistic solution. We feel that when a holistic design comes into being, beauty emerges, and that is beautiful. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Lazor.
All right. Thanks, George. That was great. I'm coming from Minneapolis. It was about -5 when I left, and I'm enjoying the heat wave here in Boston. Very nice. All good. So I'm going to just take you through the various kinds of work that I've been doing. This has been about 16 years. First Blue Dot, and then my architecture practice, as George said, and try to help you understand the thinking and the process that we go through in our work, what's important, and you'll probably see some pretty continuous threads that permeates through all the work. So this first image is a kind of a smattering of things we've done, and just so you can kind of wrap your head around the kind of sandbox that we play in. But this is really behind the curtain. This is, I understand a lot of you guys are not designers or not architects, and this is an example of the kind of messiness that happens in design, the kind of not really knowing where you're going when you start, figuring things out, thinking with a pencil, working together, bouncing ideas off of each other, very quick, very fast, and then pulling away and working solo. So it's this kind of a messiness that I think is really critical to embrace and be comfortable with as a designer. I think we're so often taught that our work is linear, and there's a beginning and a middle and an end. And I liken design to more like how a bumblebee gets to the stamen of the flower. They fly in a kind of curvilinear, elliptical, back and forth, but eventually they get right to the point. And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for how the design process works. All right, so first, furniture. So at Blue Dot, this is kind of amazing to think about. Well, you guys were young, very young. This was before the internet. This is before design within reach. This is before, this is really just as modern design was being re-embraced. People were just rediscovering mid-century modern design, which had been pretty much relegated to dusty vintage shops and was really, in a sense, had been left behind but was being rediscovered for what it was, which is really fantastic design. And so in that sense, we were lucky. The timing was excellent to start doing what we were doing. But what we're interested in is, if you can see, our design process is based on collaboration between all of the people involved in product development. Designers, customers, vendors. Vendors are the people who make the stuff. But we also force collaboration between all the different pieces of a product's life, between material and machine, between packaging and assembly, between function and aesthetics. Each of these has a different and sometimes competing requirement that needs to be considered and addressed. When all of these variables are solved into a clear, balanced, elegant equation, we find good design. We like to think that the form is almost inevitable. It's a byproduct, a residue of the process. So our job is to help it emerge as beautifully and efficiently as possible. So in a sense, I think a lot of people think of design as invention. I actually think of it is, I think, in part about invention, but I think the way we work is more about a process of discovery. We're kind of peeling back layers, and we're on this kind of search to find the kind of essential, condition that it's amongst you. It's almost right in front of you, and when you finally get to it through all that work, you're kind of like, oh, it was right there all the time. But it's not so clear when you're starting. So I'm going to just go through a couple of the principles that that have governed the work at Blue Dot. So we're interested in making design that was price accessible, retail accessible, and we quickly realized the obvious, which that things are made in this marketplace, made in one place, and shipped a long distance to another place, and then you buy it at a place called a store, and then you take it home. That whole process, that sequence of where that product goes is part of the equation. We learned very quickly that if we were going to hit any kind of affordable price point, we had to pack it flat, right? This is the IKEA model. Now, the IKEA model works very well, but nobody likes to put it together. I don't think it's particularly creative in the problem solving of this question of flat packing. So this is one of the early products we developed, and you can see at the top, it's a sheet of steel. This is cut out by a computer-controlled tool called a laser cutter, and then it's punched with a turret punch. Then that piece is hung on a rack. You know, we make these in the hundreds, and they are powder-coated. Then they're put in a kind of envelope-type packaging. So this thing stays flat the whole time. It's one piece, all holds together, no fasteners. This was, in a sense, getting to, again, kind of peeling away and getting to a super efficient model, a super efficient strategy to solve this problem. And then one of the most I think, successful parts of this is that it engages the user. So here you can see you are the one who then takes this thing and folds it into its end product. And that process of engaging the user is fun. And I think you gain a sense of kind of ownership or kind of like, wow, that was cool moment, as opposed to the IKEA model, which is struggling with directions that have been photocopied 100 times and are written in a way that you can barely understand them. Let's see. It doesn't seem to want to go. Let's just see if it. All right. All right. So then we scaled this up. We start with something small. We scaled it up, and this was the problem of the chair. This has instructions on the carton again, so it's not a separate thing. Trying to make it graphically appealing, crystal clear. But this is a chair that comes in a box of this size with a carrying handle, and that package is that wide. And this is the chair, and you can see here a whole bunch of mock-ups that we made in cardboard trying to figure out this form. So it is that kind of balance of ergonomic comfort, of efficient use of the material, of something that's going to fit into that package that would be of a size, let's say, that you can get in the back of any car, and then something that would be simple enough to bend and put together yourself. So I just talked a little bit about this engaging the user, and this is another one. This is a product we developed for Herman Miller. This is made out of polypropylene, or HDPE, high-density polyethylene. It is water jet cut, and in these little kind of star-type shapes, those little kind of cross shapes, these products hook in. So it's a kind of taking a riff off of the the very commonly known book standards that you buy at, let's say, Home Depot. So looking in a sense at solutions that are kind of off the shelf, obvious in front of you, but then just elevating them and celebrating them and spending some time to detail them so that they're beautiful. This is a shelving system called Free Play. This, again, is the idea that the decisions of what the outcome of this product is, this design is in part ours, and then we hand it over to you, and then you take the next step in the process, and you bend and shape and even cut. I think you'll see over here. There. Cutting with a utility knife, right? This is something we don't normally think about with furniture that you buy, that you can go ahead and just cut it, and kind of like this long strand of material, you can then take those different pieces and shape the kind of cubbies and nooks and bookends. Okay, simpler is better. So I went to school at a time when actually complexity was considered better, to the point of mass confusion, and nobody really knew what anyone was talking about. This was in the early 90s. And this is when I started to formulate ideas of actually seeking absolute clarity, something that was a kind of like an elegantly written sentence, short and pithy, mathematical equation in which there's, in a sense, no kind of ambiguity, things that are legible and clear. So, but this also then goes backwards in how it's made and how it's put together. So this is what we typically understand as a chair. A chair is made of lots of parts and pieces, and these are all joined together as wood has been joined together for centuries. That's difficult. Those joints are the weak part, as you well know. That's where chairs fail, where they break. And so we tackled this problem of a lounge chair by, rather than joining many different pieces of wood or material together, went to molding as the methodology. And so this is called molded plywood. This is a form that the plywood layers are laid over. These thin veneers are laid over. And then that's set into basically like a giant Ziploc bag. And then it's called a vacuum bag. And then all of that air is pulled out and the bag sucks tight. So you see products, in the supermarket or whatever that are packaged this way. So this is an old technology. It's been around for a long time, and architects have been using this material for quite a long time. But for us, it allowed us to produce a chair that solved all the problems of the complexity of all these joints and et cetera, but also yielded a very beautiful form. This is another storage system. Again, the simplicity, the idea being the kind of classic cinder block and plank shelving that you guys probably have in your dorm room. This is a kind of model that we all know. It's very simple, it's intuitive, it's clear. And so with these simple parts, you can assemble your brick and plank shelving system. This is another product that uses a method of welding called resistance welding, where all of these wires are laid down together, and then an electric current is put through them, and then they immediately weld where they touch each other, and easily formed, and then this gives us a kind of a base for a table that is very light. The other thing operating here is that these they nest, so it's like putting a pail inside of a pail inside of a pail. So for shipping and all that management, it's a very compact package. So while there's lots of problem solving behind all of this, that form that emerges might not be one that you would expect. The idea of making a table out of this kind of wire cage, kind of grocery store cart kind of industrial process, but that's what we're after. These solutions that borrow from other places, and we bring them in to help us solve the problem that we're trying to tackle. Okay, so dwelling. So you're probably starting to see that in the work that Blue Dot did, we're not trying to solve a one-off problem. We're trying to solve a big problem. And so that big problem requires repetition. It requires serial production. It requires something that can be replicated over and over again, because in order for it to be successful, it has to float in the market economy. If it's too expensive, too difficult to do, too difficult to ship, package, put together, et cetera, it's not going to solve the design problem. And this is, again, something that a kind of attitude that started to emerge when I was in architecture school, in which we were designing and we were being shown the work of guest lecturers and looking in architecture books of painfully precious architecture, painfully precious design. And I will admit I am actually a fan of painfully precious because it's painfully beautiful. But it doesn't really, I think, address what designers really need to do in their society. I mean, I see our job as solving all of the problems around us. So that's solving the problems for you guys and solving the problems for the guy down the street and solving the problem for the guy who lives out on the farm or in the city or whatever. You have to look at basically as design as a kind of development of a material culture. And in that development of that material culture that you're enabling and allowing people to achieve what they want to achieve, to have the kind of things around them that support how they live and how they work, but also, of course, doing it in a way that's attractive. So Flat Pack House was the idea of addressing this unmet need of the accessible modern house. Modern houses are fussy, complicated, they're invented, so the building industry is largely resistant to building them. They are one-offs. They are truly couture. So when I started to get into this idea of flat pack, we were looking for models of how we could develop this concept. And so the periodic table is one that came up, the idea of these kind of molecular models whereby you have these elements that have certain properties and you combine these elements and then they develop more kind of complex properties. Legos is a good and obvious one. It is a building system. It's a building toy. You can play around with it freely. It doesn't need instructions. You pick it up and you know how to join it together. So part of this whole system was it needs to be communicable, and to make it communicable, it needs to be legible. It needs to be accessible. People need to wrap their head around it. So working backwards, the builder or the fabricator, the client. Clients, I think, are often really unable to wrap their head around what their architect is doing. And so I wanted the system to be something that they could understand, in a sense, without me telling them what it is. They could come to it and get it. So this bottom image is a case study. This is the first flat pack. Well, you see it, but anyway. That's the first kind of flat pack assembly of these component parts, these elements that have different properties. It all breaks down into, these are wall panels in a series of sill heights for different kinds of relationships between inside and outside, relationships of privacy, letting light in, keeping light out, different plan forms that you could develop. With this system, it works on an 8-foot grid, and then it has a 4-foot module as well. And so with this very limited kit of parts, you could make all of these different kinds of plan forms. So few parts solve a lot of problems. So I'm interested in the way in which how we understand design and how we understand how we communicate what the design's about, that this can exist at different scales. So there's a kind of downscaled prototype, or rather case study. This is an example of making the flat pack system into a toy. So it has the posts of the system. It has the panel parts. This is the kind of plain board, which is that 8-foot grid laid out in the landscape, and so then you can just plug and play with the parts. I actually wanted to further develop this and market it as a toy that you could buy it, designed within reach or at a design shop. And then the recession came. This is a site, so the system needs to be site adaptable. There's a north and a south and an east and a west. That's part of the design problem. It's flat, it's sloped, it's steep sloped. It's in a cornfield with woods at one end. That's a condition. So there's a street here, and this is where the driveway is. All of these are the site, and so every building, good building, needs to be site-specific, site-aware. And one of the challenges, I think, in this idea of prefabricated home systems is that they're too fixed. They're not flexible enough. So this, in a sense, is the kind of flat pack grid that's thrown over the site, and it starts to frame views, and it starts to manage daylight. It starts to develop that relationship between inside and outside. So I think if you just came across this house, you'd say, oh, that's a modern house. And you probably think, well, that's the beginning and the end of it, because that's the way we think about architecture. That's the way we think about modern houses. You do one, and then that same architect does another one, but they're starting with a blank piece of paper, and they're developing largely a new design. While there might be consistent themes and attitudes that work through an architect's work, what I was interested in is thinking about the repeatability, the serial production, the serial deployment of this system. So this is a prototype. I built this with a group of friends who are actually Blue Dot alumni, furniture designers. It is built more like a ready-to-assemble piece of furniture than a conventional house. And so you can see the 8-foot grid. And it's built on that 8-foot grid. And this was an opportunity in building it and then in living it to test the system. Everything from how the corners come together to is it easy to bolt it, do the holes align, all of these things that are part of developing, in the Blue Dot days, a successful piece of furniture. This all has to, in a sense, come to be in this system. So it operates on a very technical level, and it operates on also on a site level and on a dwelling level. That big complicated question of how do we live. So this is the first manufactured flat pack. It's actually in Lincoln, Mass, which I was pretty excited about because Lincoln, Mass is like a outdoor museum of modern architect experiments, modern houses. And you can see, how different these are. So they're using it's the same chassis, it's the same parts and pieces, but the material form is variable. So this is how the packages are delivered. They're wrapped in boat wrap and treated literally like a big package. We normally think of a house as a bunch of building materials being dumped at a site, and they start processing those 2x4s and the plywood and the siding on site. This is doing it in a shop, packing it up and delivering it. So here are the panel parts being broken up out of the package. Let's see. Top center, breaking them out of the package. They're hoisting them up with a crane. They're starting to set them at the corner. I like uniforms and logos. And then here you can see the house sequentially coming together. And this is a branded house. We put that big kind of car hood ornament on the house. So I'm just going to flip through. These are different houses made out of the same system in different parts of the country. So Texas, the previous one was the Catskills. This is outside of Washington, D.C. This is in the Walker Sculpture Garden in Minneapolis. This is Woodstock. This is Woody Creek out in Colorado. This is on a lake in Wisconsin. So you can see here, again, the kind of component parts. I think that's what hopefully you'll come away with. There's this consistent approach of breaking the problem down technically into a kit of parts that can be manufactured as piece parts and then assembled to make variable outcomes. Okay, so we had the recession, or maybe climbing out of the recession, and suddenly what seemed affordable for the recession is no longer affordable. Money is super tight, and not only is it hard to borrow, but what one can borrow is less than it used to be, and people are just not comfortable borrowing. So flat pack struggled, and I think it's going to be less of a vibrant solution than I thought it was going to become. So in all design efforts. We try, and then you have to try again, and this is important. Failure is not only is it part of the kind of environment of the designer, but I would say that failure is part of the process. You have to be comfortable with it, and actually I think feel that paradoxically, if you're failing, you're actually doing a good job because you're finding the outer edge of what works and what's feasible. And until you get to that outer edge and you fall off that cliff, you don't know what kind of territory you've left unmined. So this idea is to look at the modular housing industry, which has been kicking out houses for a good 60 years. Manufacturing methods are down. These guys can rock. They can spit out a house in 2 weeks. I was initially discouraged about this kind of an approach because I didn't think you could do architecture, crafted houses. This is a prototype. It's a house on an island. It was shipped out in a ferry, and these are what I call the sticks of butter. This module and this module contains all of the complicated labor-intensive stuff: the electrical, the plumbing, the heating and air conditioning, the kitchen, the closets, built-in beds. The middle space is what we call the dry space. It's served by plugs and heating and ventilation outlets on these walls. There's no plumbing in here. It's this space here with that roof over it. This is a kind of captured space between the two modules. The client wanted a big, voluminous space. Flat pack was too expensive, and the basic modular way of making was insufficient to get this client the kind of large space that they wanted. These modules are governed by their size is governed by the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's only so high and so wide and so long that you can build and put on the road. We actually built this in a small shop, trying to learn our way through some of these questions of using a modular method as opposed to flat pack, which is a panelized method. And it worked out pretty well. It was inexpensive. It was put together on site in 5 weeks, typically on this island. Island economies, they kind of run on their own time, and people kind of charge what they want because they can. And so it's probably the least expensive cool house that was built on the island in recent memory. And it was about 6 weeks in our shop and 5 weeks on site, 11 weeks. So you're in just under 3 months. Pretty remarkable. I have a friend who built there, and he is still working on a house. It's been over 1.5 years. This is another modular house going onto a lake in Canada. Okay, I'm going to click right through these. These are, this is a workspace for an ad agency. The conception came out of the site plan, or the city plan for the city of Savannah. We have parks of public space, and we have neighborhoods of workspace in between. This is a group of people. They work horizontally, collaboratively. Nobody has an office. Everybody has a laptop. This is this 48-foot long wood table. The top image is the kind of, that's the beauty shot. I think it's uninteresting. I think that this lower image is really what's interesting. It's about socialization. It's about building a community and collaborating. And all of that comes through this kind of simplicity, but I think kind of on-point choice of a material that's really going to impart a sense of place, tactile, and a place that, in a sense, people want to gravitate to. These are some construction shots of that space. The lower, these are the log cabins, the lower right, that are the getaway spaces. This is the table being built. All this kind of wood process. This is, in a sense, the 4 places of this workplace that engender a collaborative work and play environment. So the upper left, the getaway spaces, but transparent so that everyone can see through, and everyone, in a sense, knows what's going on and can jump in and be part of the work. The work wall, upper right, with a steel canopy above to kind of frame that space. The big group table, and then that's one of the side streets of the town plan of this place called Mono. And then you can see the whole piece together, all of those parts and pieces working together. So the neighborhood park at the end, the broad avenue with the work wall, the most public part of the workplace, the neighborhood of the work desks in the middle, and then this was before it was finished. These are all just snapshots. This was finished about a month ago. I saw this when I was in there the other day, and I took a shot of it. I thought it was interesting, designing a healthier Minnesota. They're an ad agency, but they're designing healthcare. 5 guys and 2 women. They all have their one-man shop. They all work independently, but they all come together in different kind of configurations of those 7 people to do projects in different ways. This is the model. It consists of the wrapper, which is this piece here. This is a big whiteboard. Central Park, which is that long table in the middle. And then those triangular pieces are what we call the work widgets. They're these kinds of rolling whiteboard spaces. Again, a collaborative kind of new workplace way of working. This is the building of the wrapper. This is a series of completed shots of the completed space. And you can see how they work. They're brainstorming, sharing ideas, working out things together, and then they break off and they do solo work. Learning. So this is at the University of Minnesota College of Design. This is the BDA program. This was a studio I ran for a year, and the students designed their studio space. Their studio space didn't work at all. It wasn't furnished and organized in a way that was appropriate for how they learn and how teachers teach. The students did a whole bunch of research, a whole bunch of mapping, a whole bunch of diagramming, as you can see in the middle, modeling, drawing, brainstorming, and they developed a design after about 2 semesters of work. And these are some photographs. These were just taken the other day. This was just finished for the beginning of this semester. So they have a big lounge. That's a 24/7 student space. It's surrounded by lockers. That was a kind of a key thing. It was something as simple as a locker where you could lock your laptop that allowed people to stay there, and rather than go home and do their work at home. These students typically, they're a hot desk studio, so they don't have a permanent place, and typically they would go home and do their work. But right now what we've got going on in this place, the design of these desks and whiteboards, monitors for video stuff, all of this is now creating a place where these students stay to work collaboratively, socialize, eat, nap, and live. There we go. That's the end.
Well, it's hard to imagine a better set of stuff to talk about in the context of the things that we've been talking about in this class. I guess maybe there's a lot of conversation starters to get us going, but maybe the first one is something that clearly maybe we have in common, in the sense that we both came out of design school maybe with a similar sense that there was a real need for prototypical thinking, and this battle that is not apparent to all of you necessarily, because many of you are in school in a different time, and many of you are not studying design explicitly.
Yeah.
But this, I would say, broad theme of a distinction between the one-off and the prototypical. And, you know, maybe you want to say a bit more about, well, first of all, how did you actually make the migration from being an architecture student to Blue Dot?
Right.
Both practical or intellectual?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had always been interested in furniture design, and if you open up a book of modern furniture design, most of those guys were trained as architects. So yeah, I just saw them as two different, two of the same in a sense. But quite honestly, I wanted to get out on my own, and it was an opportunity to do that and start to do some work according to these ideas that I had been thinking about in college and rather in grad school and out of grad school. So it was a platform.
Right. Well, it's interesting because another student asked right before we got started, well, doesn't this other architect also do furniture? And the truth is, it's very common for architects to do furniture, especially early in their careers, for a number of reasons. But one of them is, unlike buildings that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, you can have, and over whose production, as a young architect, you have almost no control.
Yeah.
As a young person, you can, and I did the same thing, though to much less effect, I might add, than you have. You can design and execute furniture and see the results and iterate and get right back into it at a pace and at a scale that is much more like what you've just been doing as a student.
Yeah. You can do it out of your garage,
right,
or in a little studio. But what was so formative about that was stepping out of architecture space, not doing one-off furniture, and seeing how all of these tools that make the world around us, how they work, what they could do. At the same time, I actually was building a house. I was, overseeing construction of a house, and it was just unbelievable. It's a black comedy of errors, of misinterpretations, of, remarkable inefficiency. So, then I'd go into these manufacturing facilities and I'd see this orderly process. And I was like, well, why can't we make a house this way?
Right.
Now, I wasn't the first person to have that idea. I had read about this idea. But there's nothing like seeing material facts in front of you that focus your attention and tell you, oh, the light bulb went off.
Yeah. Well, again, for the non-design students, it is hard to overstate how much prefabricated housing has been one of the holy grails of modern architecture. I mean, if not the kind of light at the end of the tunnel, it is the thing that so many of the sort of heroic era of early modern architects aimed towards in one way or another. And it ran up against, as I'm sure you know, it ran up against all kinds of different obstacles.
Yeah.
They were not all the same.
Yeah.
What's her name? A woman from, she teaches at UCLA, wrote a great book about this very thing, about prefabricated housing running into a whole different set of obstacles.
Well, it's a different animal. So banks don't know what to do with it. Appraisers don't know what to do with it. The building trades don't know what to do with it.
That's right.
And so that, one of the lessons I was trying to learn was, okay, well, how do you develop a system that people get, that can be built, that can be financed, and so flat pack from a bank's point of view is a stick frame house, and from an inspector's point of view is a stick frame house. But what's interesting about prefabrication as this holy grail is that these were architects who were trying to solve social problems on a large scale, on a national scale, and this is in large part post-war, where again, a huge leap in technology and the ability to make things was transformed. And so how do you put all of those machines and all those methodologies to work to solve post-war needs, post-war social problems. And architects are idealistic, and they say everybody should have good light, and everybody should have good ventilation, and everyone should have a space that's enjoyable and pleasant to be in. But it's a tricky one, and it's one of many different layers. It can't be generalized. I don't think you can make any kind of blanket statements about it, or blanket kind of assessments. It's the more I get into it, the more complicated I see that it is, and the more I realize that I really don't know yet how to do this.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because you alluded to the point about how regulators understand these different types of housing, and I imagine that the flat pack is understood completely differently than the modular one that you showed that built on the island towards the end.
Yeah.
They're completely different animals because, again, this might not seem obvious to you guys, but there's a kind of continuum, if you want. You could say at one end of the spectrum is something like a car, and the other end of the spectrum is a sculpted, handmade stone house, and that's completely one of a kind, maybe carved out of the side of a mountain.
Yeah.
And prefabricated housing, the idea was to migrate that cave dwelling towards the car. Yeah. The problem is, along the way, at some point, it ceases to become a house in a regulatory sense. Is there a building inspector? Is there, instead, for example, when you think about what we know maybe sometimes pejoratively as trailer homes, well, one of the key things there is that they had wheels and they were mobile and they were understood in a regulatory world to become something else completely from a house.
Yeah.
And still are. And you can't borrow money against them the same way. And
you can't, there's not a lot of land that you can put them on.
That's right.
They're zoned out because it's a way to regulate what you can and cannot put on that property. In other words, a trailer is going to devalue, understood devalue property, and so you write in the zoning code, it's called chassis, no chassis-based houses. But interestingly, again, I think though, particularly in architecture school and architectural training, you're taught to think as the inventor, as the genius, as the person who is going to do something for the first time. I'm actually interested in looking at the things around us, the things that we might not really pay attention to because they're so banal, they're so ordinary, they're so seemingly dumb. But if you take them apart, you actually realize that they work very well. They're very well thought out. Now, this is also a question of how culture works, which is you can break it out into, let's say, the self-conscious designer, right? The designer, by nature self-conscious, they sit down and they have something to design. Versus the kind of, I think that the equally, it's a different thing, but I guess it's undervalued, which is that through small steps over many years, something slowly evolves. It's a kind of evolutionary process of which you might not even see that it's going on in front of you. You can't necessarily even track it. But those outcomes tend to work. They've just been massaged and tweaked and worked over many, many, many years. And I think if you look in that world, you'll find actually a lot of solutions that you can kind of pick up and put on your design table and put to work.
Just to make that even a bit more concrete, it's a great point. This is what is often called the vernacular. You think about what is a vernacular solution. Well, a cape house in this region is probably a vernacular solution. Or if you think about a certain kind of cabin in mountainous regions where whole logs or are in such abundance that becomes
you clear the land and you build it out of what you cleared.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly there's a really tight logic to that.
Correct.
and that you know, it's interesting.
That's that tight logic. I mean, that's a good way to put it. That tight logic is something that I would say that that's how we think we think. How I'd like to think we think. Seeking that tight logic. All ways of thinking about design and all ways of designing I find interesting, but there are ways of designing that I found too often and ways of thinking that got so far off track, so off the need that was trying to be fulfilled, that you kind of look around and you're like, what happened?
Well, we have a term for that here. It's called, and there are a lot of architects and a lot of architecture schools that I think are guilty of this. That is solving problems that nobody has. Right. They come up with an incredibly elegant solution to a problem that no one has, right. And this is at the end somewhat unfulfilling.
Yes, and that's the tension between the academy and the world outside. You know, the world that makes mobile homes versus the world of the academic world of where you're given the space to speculate. Right. And I think it's putting those two things together, having the skill and the elasticity of mind to do research and to speculate and to play and mess around, but also looking at how the world outside operates, never losing sight, not only never losing sight of that, but always going to it to look for, in a sense, the solutions that are right in front of you. And I think this is what a good designer is. I think a good designer is someone who recognizes a solution or recognizes the right answer to something, as opposed to try to kind of invent it and create it out of thin air or from a blank piece of paper.
This is really great because there is some context in this course now that we're 8 lectures in or 10 lectures in, however far. So I want to ask the students a question. Give me some examples of we're going to talk about chairs for a second. What is your favorite chair? Some of you, I mean, even maybe the designers probably are. It's easier for them to answer this, but any of you, what is your favorite chair? Yeah.
I have 2.
Okay.
I'll start there. The Aaron Miller.
The Aeron chair.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the name is it's the famous plywood molded chair.
The
ottoman.
Yeah. Okay.
With the upholstery in it, the leather. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody know at least one of those. The Herman Miller Aeron chair. We've seen pictures of it. It's a very contemporary office task chair with the fabric back and seat. It's very
all
comfortable.
Black.
Yeah.
Lots of moving parts.
Yeah. Incredibly complex.
Very complex, and that was the knock against it.
Sure. But now let me just complete this thought experiment here. Your chair, the flatback chair that you showed us, at least.
Otherwise, it's the real good chair.
Oh, it's called the real good.
Because in Wisconsin, when you end a conversation, you say, "Yo, real good,
real good,
real good." Now.
Yeah, it's a great chair, real good. Okay, so now here's the question for all of you: is the Herman Miller Aeron chair addressing the same problem that the flatback chair is addressing? No. What's the difference in the problems?
Wealth spending.
Yeah.
But also using different materials, mesh. Just looks different.
Yeah, no. So one is about let's say optimizing for ergonomic, support and
where you
comfort.
Sit for 8 hours.
Yeah, and another one is about style, inexpensive, easy to ship. I mean, you tell me. What are the
accessible? I mean, it started as a chair that sells for $99.
Right.
That's actually that was the program, and you'll see designers, a lot of those simple plastic chairs out there. That's kind of like the problem, the chair for $100. So, but plastic molds are very expensive. They cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a company like Blue Dot can't afford a plastic injection mold. So, all right, that's off the table. Okay, so then what are we going to do? And so, you then just start looking around and blah, 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 and then we started to say, well, wait a second, that method of folding metal with the perforations, that maybe that's a solution. And it is. The same economies that system offered at the smaller scale, it offers at the scale of a chair. But, it's interesting, the Aeron chair. The Aeron chair is interesting because it is. To me, it's a caning. It's a caned chair. So you guys know what caning is. You have a frame, and then you have caning, which is like it's a natural material. You know what I'm talking about? Age-old technology, and it works. Right. Comfortable, inexpensive, and you can resew it. Yep. You can repair the Aeron chairs. That mesh is really to me that's just the reconceptualization of caning, but with high-tech material. But then, like a car, has all of these levers and parts and adjustments.
I've had one for 10 years, and
You've never adjusted it?
Oh, I don't dare. I don't dare fuss with any of the knobs for fear that it will go off. Really.
Yeah.
It's like Photoshop in this respect.
Yeah.
I don't dare mess with it. I scan the image in. I adjust the tone and contrast.
Yeah.
I save it, and I get out before anything bad can happen.
Yeah. So again, when you're designing something, you have to first, what is the knowledge of the person who's going to be you're asking to adjust it or put it together or whatever, and then secondly, are they going to care sufficiently to do it? Right. I mean, by nature, I would say we're probably kind of lazy as a species. We do things we have to do.
Especially once we have an Aeron chair.
Or have great desire for. Yeah, exactly. Put to sleep. So, are you going to spend the time to adjust it? And a lot of that answer has been no. Right. So the ones that have been subsequent to that are much simpler and much more intuitive to adjust.
Well, this business about simplicity, of course, the only book that they've been required to read in this class is Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, just because it is so infused. It's a biography. It's a business story, but it's really colored by design the whole way through. Yeah. And this whole business, we talked about this in the first lecture, about simplicity and how it really does depend what problem you're solving. It's not like the question we didn't follow up with was, which is better, the real good chair or the Aeron chair? Because I think the answer is, it depends on what your criteria are. Right. That's like saying which is better, the new Fiat Cinquecento or the Lamborghini.
Right.
Well, they're different. I mean, they're solving different problems. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think before you get exposed to this world, it would be easy to say, what are you talking about? The correct answer is the Lamborghini. How could you get that wrong?
Right.
This is one of the things that we're I think trying to tease out.
Right. And I think that's a good point. I think most architects they're trained to design Lamborghinis.
Yeah, that's true.
But when you do that, I think there's a responsibility issue and a responsibility question in how architects or designers are trained.
Right.
And so if you're designing for the 1% and you abdicate designing for the 99%, are you really a designer? Or are you just self-indulgent? Are you ignoring obvious realities? I think that the beauty of design is that you can make the world around you better. You can make human existence on a daily basis better. Right. But you have to figure out how to make it swim in the marketplace. Right? The marketplace rules our culture. So if you can't make it for a certain price and you can't ship it and you can't explain it and you can't do it over and over again, it's going to be something that one or a few people enjoy, and that's not really solving large-scale problems and fulfilling large-scale needs.
Yeah. This is a great point because, we already, just to quickly get back for a second to your early transition into doing furniture. Many people who do this, they get out of design school, they've learned their chops, they're really ready to go.
I want to be Carlos Scarpa.
Yeah, I want to be Carlos Scarpa. I want to be, there are any number of heroic players that you could emulate. But the irony is, many people who do furniture, they don't do it to get into the replicability.
Right.
They do it because here is a medium where I can actually make my own little Lamborghini.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, because it's interesting that is not what you did.
Yeah.
Because that mode of operation actually blurs the distinction between the two. If you have your own, a few shop tools, a table saw, a drill press, and a few things, you can blur the distinction between the custom-made and the one-off. You can spend 10 weekends in a row making this completely discrete, unique thing that you can't wait to show somebody, and that is not the solution to any problem and is extraordinarily time-consuming to build.
Right. Which we might call that fetish.
Yes.
Right. Which, is a problem. Architects, they're kind of cursed. They love beauty. They love the tactile. They're people of the senses, and that's what gets them excited. But you have to govern and manage your love of these things, and you have to keep your eye on why does this thing exist. This is a question we always ask in the office, or I ask of my students. So why is it this way? Why isn't it another way?
Right.
What about this way, this way, this way? Why is it that way? And then the other question is okay, well, if it's yours, if you're trying to make a decision, should it be this way or that way? If it's yours, what would you want?
Right.
And that often, I think, really clarifies for people what the right answer is. Right, it's a hard word to use. Better answer, let's say. Because as designers, as architects, we do have a kind of separation from what we're doing, because it's often not for us, it's for somebody else. And in that space, I think you can become a little bit self-indulgent, get a little bit out of focus, and seek, in a sense, rewards that are maybe not relevant to the problem at hand.
Now, this whole prototypical and one-off thing is obviously going to be kind of the theme of this conversation. But towards the end of your talk, you started to show some workplace environments that seemed much more customized, much more one-off. It seems to me that your business experience has been migrating all around this table from trying to do completely, Blue Dot is the most market-driven, completely colored by economic environment. Then Flat Pack, perhaps in the midst of what seemed like a rational economic environment, but later turned out not to be, that we all lived in between the years of 2004 and 2007, maybe. And then the modular thing, which is less clear. But I would say that then the fourth position is now the more customized workspace environments. How do you see that?
Yeah. Well, the way those work, all the decisions in the work environments were eventually made by understanding either how the client works or how they want to work, or a combination of the two. And so they're ad agencies. So the good thing is you're designing for hip, young things, so they're open. They want stuff that looks cool. But all of them actually were very focused on how they want to, what they need to work, how we call them work tools. So whether it's whiteboard material that surrounds you, to work tables that have casters on them so you can roll them, to the location of outlets so you can plug in projectable surfaces, central zones where people come together, and then quiet places where people go away. Those spaces were, in a sense, custom designed per the user for their specific needs. There's overlap, but they had specific needs. They also had different sensibilities. That one ad agency, Mono, everything is white, super clean, super simple. They do work for Apple. Those Target ads that are out now with the they kind of lampoon fashion models, and they're all in white, and they're using like, you know, they're selling grocery products. Have you guys seen that ad campaign? So anyway, super clean. The other guys, they're kind of more versatile. They're 5-7 people,
Right.
and so they all have different sensibilities, and so it wasn't so kind of mono. It wasn't so singular in terms of aesthetic and how it worked. But to answer your question, they're customized to the need of the client.
But doesn't this beg a... Let me ask you guys, does this is really begging a question in me. We've talked about the prototypical in terms of housing. Now we're talking about office environments. The question that's begging in me is, of course, are you considering getting into a set of a recombinable office?
Yeah.
I mean, because
It's
that is a
question.
marketplace that exists, right?
It has existed.
I mean,
And
Herman
it's-
Miller
Right.
lives in that market.
Herman Miller and Steelcase. And it was the post-war rise of the American corporation, and then building technology that allowed long spans, so you have big open floor plates. You don't need walls, and they're speculative office spaces. So you move in and you have the Herman Miller office system designer lay out your workstations, and that became bastardized and became the cubicle.
Right.
So, you know, it's a really good question. It's got me thinking, which is, it almost makes me think that the one-off it's like the custom designed app is more the model for the new office space, and that the office system that that has been defining the workspace for the last 50 years is a problem. Because it's too singular, it's not flexible enough.
Right.
It determines too much about how you work and how people interact. There was Herman Miller Red, which started in the .com. You know, the .com, and this is where people, companies they start over the weekend, and at the end of the first week, they need 10 desks, and the end of the second week they need 20 more. So Herman Miller Red was designed to be this idea that the package arrives, you open the carton, you put it together really easily, and you just throw it out there. It's a kind of just a bunch of pieces that kind of wander around a floor, whereas the other systems, they take time and they have to be installed by trained people, and you can't just take them apart, and so things become fixed. And Herman Miller Red is, when the bubble burst for the .com era, they also went by the wayside. But I kind of wonder if that's not the better model. It's like parts and pieces that you can just kick out there, and people kind of use them for what they're good for. And they need to be tools.
Think about the analogy with prefabricated housing, where on the one hand, in almost every setting, and you stop me if I make a mistake, there's a foundation or site condition that has to be done, that doesn't come off the truck, right?
Yeah.
There's a part before the truck gets there.
Yeah.
Somebody has to make sure there's electricity and plumbing, presumably, water supply, basic utilities, maybe, if it's really out in the sticks, a driveway and all the rest, and that can be many tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
But that then becomes the receptacle for the prefabbed stuff.
Yeah.
Seems to me in an office environment that there is sort of it might be interesting to tease out which parts of those environments that you guys just did are kind of the core, everybody's got to have them aspects, and which parts are the more flexible. I mean, like the rolling tables and the collaboration spaces. In a way, it seems to me that those things aren't going to be as different as the clients like to think they are.
Yeah.
What I mean is, how many different ways to, even in a world where there's more different ways to work, how many different ways to work are there really?
Yeah.
Right? You can have, like, the long table is now becoming it is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Right? It is a physicalization of a new way of working, of kind of collaboration where we're facing each other and
Yeah.
So that's become
That piece is there. The
That's
getaway
what you see.
space.
Yeah.
The brainstorming, dry erase.
What Marshall Lawson would have called
board.
maybe the project room,
Yeah.
which is where you put enough stuff. We would call it a pinup space, or
Yeah.
something where you can put enough ideas on the wall that then your brains are free enough to actually speculate about them.
Yep.
I can imagine a pretty clear to-do list
Yeah.
about that side of the thing.
Yeah. You want to start like a new business?
Yeah, well, I told these people I don't know what the outcome of this course is going to be. I don't know. When Marshall Lawson was here, we were going to reconceptualize the College of Design at the University of Illinois Chicago Circle. I guess what really happens is the lunches afterwards.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But I mean, I think what's great about this is, in a way, it's a little bit of real-time brainstorming about the very issues that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And by identifying the 4 quadrants, let's say, of the things you talked about.
Yes.
I think I don't know, for me it's very clarifying, because it's easy to think of prefabricated housing, for example, or furniture as just its own domain.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people before they walked in here today, I think I know what furniture is.
Right.
And maybe I even know what prefabricated housing is, but there are different, significantly different aspects of it, or
Yeah.
places on that continuum,
Yeah.
and different problems that it's trying to solve.
Yeah.
Like, one of the clear ones that I think is so interesting about prefab housing is, of course, it's just like the $100 chair versus the Aeron chair. Are you trying? Because prefab, one of the attractions of prefab is affordability.
Yeah.
Are you guys using these post-Second World War tank factories, or using these post-Second World War bomber factories? Are you going to be able to turn out housing for people at a cost per square foot that is a quarter of what we've been doing? That was kind of the dream.
Yeah.
One of the dreams.
The problem with that, not a quarter.
Yeah.
That's where people got off.
Right.
Got a little too excited.
Right.
But
nuclear power is supposed to be too cheap to meter, too.
Yeah. Right. But in those modular factories, they could do the work of a modern architect. A little more time, a little more detail, a little more thinking. In 4 weeks, they can build a series of modules that then get shipped out. 4 weeks. 4 weeks is the time it takes, if you're lucky, to get a foundation in the ground. Framing a house of similar size and form, more than 4 weeks. So, I mean, I was stunned when they were telling me the time frame to expect, and I was thinking, oh man, this could be a mess. I don't know how they could possibly move so quickly, but they can.
Right.
And it's not a mad rush. So anyway, point being that you can get to these much better price points, and then you can fulfill need on a much larger scale than you can, even if you design a system as a kind of a plan book. I mean, that's another kind of thing we've thought about, is plan books that you can buy. The designs are almost always not good designs, but it's a methodology of putting out information to somebody who needs, in this case, a house, and how to build it, and what they need to build it, and everything else. So anyway, lots of different approaches, but I mean, making buildings is kind of incredible. It's one of the, maybe the only thing that we make today that is not made through manufacturing methodology. Couture, fashion is another one.
Right.
There's just
high
not
fashion.
Yeah,
Couture.
yeah, the one-off.
Not
So there's really, if you try to think about other things that are not made according to a manufacturing methodology, and so the building industry is just stubbornly resistant to these approaches.
Design landscape is a great example of something related to architecture, but it's always a one-off. You have to be grounded in space. I'm fascinated by the idea of a house has universal logics to it,
Yeah.
but then it has to respond to specific site conditions. And you mentioned some of them, like orientation and slope.
Yeah.
But the but you can't do anything but a one-off in site design in
Right.
a way. So how does Universal meet the specific?
You have to be there on site. I was talking to a landscape architect friend because by the time my clients are done, they have about just enough money to build a house, but they've got no money to do the landscape. And it's just like, we got to heal the ground and make this all work together. And I said, couldn't you just do a roll of some kind of a medium and like put seeds in it, and you just you roll this thing up and put it in a tube, and then you just unroll it like a big rug, and but your design is all seeded in there, and just water it. It comes up. Yeah, chia pet. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's shaping the earth is. I mean, it's a step-by-step process.
Well, let me ask, we've got some questions here. So I guess I'll just repeat the question. How about that?
I do have one question. This is sort of someone that cares quite a bit about their own home. The question that this mass customization seems to rise to me is that what is home? I mean, is this sort of the last frontier in terms of our own unique innovation, and we put our own stamp on things, whereas like everything else in our lives, we don't care if our iPhone is made by one plant in China or another plant in China. But our home is our own home. That's the place that we.
Right. Okay. So let me just repeat that question for our recording, which is that the home, one's personal residence, seems like a different thing than a car or a phone or anything, a product like that. That it has some other quality that the designer of the house is responsible to respond to, some other question that needs to be responded to. Is that fair enough?
Yeah. Right. And tell me what you use the word mass customization. Are you saying that is that a solution to making things tailored to a specific person's tastes or sensibility? Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess my first answer to that is there's a bunch of us who work in this kind of modern prefab space, and everyone's houses look, I think, to the reasonably trained eye, they look and feel pretty different. So it's just like the Model T might have been the first car, but it wasn't that everything stopped and that was the only car you could buy. So you have a marketplace of car choices, which is highly differentiated. I mean, there's cars for people who are 18 to 24, right? So what I think would be good is to have a more robust group of options for people to choose from in this, let's say this prefabricated house market. Now, I would say, though, that, I mean, the way I like to think of our houses, our flat pack houses, that they're a kind of a frame, and they're an armature, and they handle the big pieces, daylight, thermal envelope, passage, how you kind of negotiate and live and feel in a space. But everything you put into it, all the furniture and the rugs and the lamps and the chia pets and the objects and whatever it is, right? That's your customization. Now, that assumes that you like the way it looks. It does look a specific way. But I don't think there's a universal answer. Walter Gropius, who was one of the founders of the Bauhaus and then basically founded the GSD as a modern architecture department, developed a system. It was called it was a universal system. And by the time they were done making it universal, it was dull as dishwater. It had no life, nothing inspiring or compelling about it. It worked. I mean, it went together very quickly. But when it was all said and done, it was just so emptied out of any soul. And I think that's probably what you're going to end up with if you try to do a universal solution. So I just think you need lots of models.
Well, and the truth is that when it comes to housing, it has been somewhat industrialized for a long time, 150 years. I mean, since they started making wood studs the same size.
Yeah.
And so let's take our own environment here in Boston. I would say 60% of the housing stock in this area is wooden 3-story triple deckers. In other words, it is a prototype repeated block after block because it solves multiple questions. It solves interestingly, it solves, yes, it meets the basic criteria. It has 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a bathroom and a living room and a dining room. So check 1. Okay, good. It's got that. It also answers an economic question. The 3-story building were often used in the 100 years ago. Someone would buy the whole building. They'd rent out the upper or 2 of the floors, and the revenue that was generated by those apartments would pay their mortgage, and ultimately they'd go from being poor immigrants to being homeowners. So it was an economic model that worked, which wouldn't have worked if it were 100 units, or wouldn't have worked if it were 1.
Right.
It solved an urbanistic problem. These buildings were designed to make good streets and go through Cambridge or Dorchester or Roxbury or any number of other neighborhoods in this area, and you'll see good, well laid out streets that are defined by this housing type. So interestingly,
and that's the vernacular cultural production that George was talking about before. That there wasn't a design office that designed that. It's an accretion of decisions and moves that probably were determined and sorted out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I'm sure they were.
Whose is selling and whose is not. When you deviate from the model, do you get stuck with the real estate because it didn't quite fit what that buyer wants? And so they do become actually very efficient models of making and selling and buying and everything else. Now that actually goes back to, I think, your question, which I think to an architect's point, that has its own problems of not being personalized, or it's generalized rather than reflective of the specific owner's kind of taste or aesthetic or whatever. And that's why people hire architects to do a one-off, a couture suit or dress, one-off, that fits their specific kind of personality or sensibility. So somewhere between those 2 positions is where, I think we've been trying to play around and take the benefits of both of them, or the needs of both of them, and kind of sew them together.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet in this same space, which is so interesting, the more as we unpeel it, there's more and more issues, is thinking. We often see these prefab houses in discrete, let's say, isolated, naturalistic settings, where the only context, actually, the context looks remarkably similar in each case. It's either a beautiful mountain range, snow-capped mountains, or it's in the woods, or it's something like this. Have you guys thought about communities of these things? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think that's
and talk to so many developers. I'm kind of like, do you guys do anything, or do you just talk? Talk and talk and talk, So we call them coffee drinkers. So yes, but again, I think that who wants to be first? Who wants to take the risk? Who wants to put their money, put all their money at risk? A couple of those, I hear what you're saying, and you're correct. And they boil down into what we call view houses, and then infill houses. And 2, 3 of the ones that I showed actually are in cities, but they typically are on these large open pieces of land, second homes and first homes. But it's and I'm very interested in doing multiple unit housing. The more of it, the more component parts you make and put together, the more cost effective it becomes. So it's economies of scale. And I would love to do that. That's, in a sense, kind of really letting that horse really gallop and run. But so far, it's actually been, kind of one after the other as discrete projects. That's the low horsepower model of, I think, what the flat pack system is about.
Well, that is the point of that's the entry point in the marketplace. That I would say I'm not aware of anyone ever having really gotten through to the next stage. If this is like a video game, this is the first level, and everybody wants to get up to that second level where there are developments of these. It becomes a recognized type. Banks are it's just another pull down menu item on their financing list. But this is really, it might seem odd to you guys, but to break through from one-off, it's one thing to say I'd like to engage the prototypical, but it's really hard to do it.
It's I don't know, why is the building industry so resistant? So for example, in Minneapolis, you'll probably see this around Boston, but in Minneapolis it's densifying, lots of condos and now apartments being built, and the way in which these are done, I mean, these are like highly market determined buildings. And a few years ago they were prefabricating the stud walls with a little bit of plywood on, and they were setting them. And then a few years later, I see they're putting the Tyvek on it. And then a few years later, they're putting the window in it. In the meantime, I'm thinking, like, why don't you just do the whole thing all the way down to, like, the bathrooms as these pod modules completely done, blah, 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 blah. And but a developer doesn't want to take that much risk with that idea because they can make money doing it the way they're doing it. So it just moves incrementally, and in 20 years perhaps they'll be doing it the way we conceptualize flat pack, but it takes time.
Yes. Oh yes, please. Thank you. I'm glad that you guys are on top of it.
First, thank you for being here. You sound like a very inspired entrepreneur driven by design rather than a designer or an architect. So I'm just wondering, what was the aha moment that turned you from a student of this very complexity-driven school to this utilitarian problem solver, design for a better world architect and entrepreneur?
Probably just, I think, personal experience, just personal frustration. Just seeing a world around me that didn't really, a design world that wasn't paying attention to people like myself and my friends and, just regular old people. What's that?
Did you find resistance or?
No, I found we were praised. It was interesting. I mean, as an architect, a lot of times you're commonly not a very popular person despite your greatest efforts. But I remember with Blue Dot, people would be like, "Oh, I love what you do," and blah, blah, blah. This is so great. And I was like, this is good. I like this.
Well, it was a real cultural moment, actually, because there was, in schools of design, and I would say in our design culture, the beginnings of dismay at how sort of disengaged it had become. The separation of design culture from the problems of the everyday world had grown really large, I would say, in the 1990s. And by, this is a larger story, but in the early 90s there was a seminal show, maybe it was actually 1989, a seminal show at the Museum of Modern Art called Deconstructivism.
Yeah.
And, I think after that, a lot of people sort of said, wow, boy, I don't even know what this has to do with, they would go home to where they live, and they would wonder, gee, I wonder, are they going to build things like that near me?
Right. Why is this relevant? It's interesting.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't know that it's necessarily relevant. I mean, there's two architects. I think it's fantastic. They design with their eyes closed, right? So, and I think that's super interesting, and it hooks into all kinds of ideas of art making in the 20th century and chance and intuition and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, again, that kind of material culture we need to support our existence and elevate our existence is not being addressed. So in our own kind of small way, wanted to take a swing at that and try to make a change.
Other questions? Yeah, here, let me give you this.
Did you ever look into more affordable flat pack technology for like social housing or disaster relief housing, something that could be rapidly shipped around the world, or not for profit necessarily, but for social need?
All stuff I would definitely be interested in. It's a different problem, and it requires a whole different kind of client. It's like a whole kind of different business. But to answer your question, yes. I mean, social housing is infinitely complicated and difficult, and you can't solve social problems with housing. So it's a multivalent problem. But disaster relief, there's a lot of thinking in that area, and students a lot pin up these kinds of projects. They're all kind of the same, and I think it actually needs a whole different way of thinking. But to answer your question, yeah, it'd be great. But the UN hasn't called yet.
Well, it really is a different place. There's a bunch of different points on this continuum.
Right.
From, disaster relief, which is, can you get something that's really light and very inexpensive to make and super easily transported and simple to assemble, and and it keeps the water out at minimum and does these various things. That's one end of the spectrum. And then permanent affordable housing is a completely different enterprise. And then sort of good quality, crisp, target level, modern architecture, clean, neat. We got the designer of the OXO kitchen implements. Tucker Weimeister is coming later to the course. But that level of just kind of comfortable, efficient stuff, and then super high-end stuff that is machine made because you can get better tolerances and you can get actually better constructed modern architecture that way. These are wildly different enterprises.
Yes. Yep.
So, yes. Here, let's give you the mic if you don't mind. Could you pass that back? I'd toss it, but we need to get it here.
Can you just talk about the energy consumption of flat pack houses, mainly speaking, heating and cooling, how they compare to like regular houses?
The energy consumption?
Yeah.
The operating?
Yeah, just heating and cooling.
Mainly. Heating and cooling them. Is it more efficient or less efficient than a regular quote-unquote house? Yeah. Well, here's the issue. We all want lots of glass, but glass has much lower thermal value than a wall. So it's a balance, but I'll tell you the glass typically wins. But we do use we have a higher insulated value wall than is, let's say, the market standard. We put insulation on the outside of the stud wall, and we use a higher R value, more expensive insulation in the cavity. We do certainly look at passive either heating or cooling, where the sun comes through or does not come through the glass to either generate heat inside the house, like a greenhouse works, or your car windshield when it's hot, to either harvest that or block it out so it doesn't heat up the house. And then use high efficiency boilers or heating systems, or geothermal is a way to generate energy or heat and cool a house at a lower use of energy.
But where the big difference is, though, I mean, everything you're saying sounds completely right. The glass is the big variable in whether it's in situ construction or prefab construction. Yeah. But the huge difference in energy consumption is in the production of the thing. Yeah. Because the waste, stop me if I make a mistake, but the reduction in waste in good quality prefabricated housing versus on-site construction of the same rough size or value is a big factor.
Yeah, a lot less material waste. If you have a larger facility, let's say the guys who are making that modular house that I showed the renderings of, all the guys that work there live within like a 10-mile radius. So every day they drive 20 miles. as opposed to a typical job site. The guys and all those subcontractors are driving much longer distances. So the gas they burn in their truck is going to be less when you're doing manufactured housing. So less material waste, typically less carbon burned, although then there's the shipping of it, but on balance, understood typically to be less. Basically I think you just want a thoughtful design process. And there's a lot of decisions to make in terms of how to make something that's more energy efficient, and then the process of getting there. So, it's complicated. I had a client in Texas, one of those houses I showed you, it's in Texas, and very remote place, and they wanted a flat pack house because they didn't think there were reliable building trades around, which is largely true. But I said, why don't we do an adobe house? I wanted, there's the dirt is right there. And you could find guys locally who know how to make a house out of adobe bricks. So that seemed like, to me, a very good solution. Vernacular. They didn't want to do that, but again, it's, they're kind of stunned, like, what? I thought you were like Mr. Manufactured House guy. And I'm like, I don't know. I think maybe just the right solution at the right time for the right problem.
I think that's a great thing to close on. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks very much.